The Georgia Gold Rush, taking place in and around modern-day Dahlonega, up in the Blue Ridge region of northern Georgia, has some ambiguity about when it actually began. Depending on which scholarly source you may look at, sources debate whether it began as early as 1827 or 1829. However, what is not debated is the first documentation we have of gold being found in Georgia, that being in a newspaper released in a town called Milledgeville on August 1st, 1829. This town being 140 miles away from Dahlonega, one can assume that the information was known a bit prior and then it took a little bit for it to get over there. With that being said, though, with the news being out there that there is now gold in Georgia, roughly 6,000 settlers moved up to Blue Ridge in order to find their fortune. This would be called the Great Intrusion. Why, you may ask? Well, there's only one small issue. People were already living up there. At this point in their history, the Cherokee natives have inhabited this region of Georgia and parts of Lower Appalachia for many centuries, even before European colonization. Slowly over the years, the state of Georgia and European settlers overall have slowly chipped away at Cherokee land through various treaties and land lotteries and things of that nature, but the discovery of gold in the state became the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. Speaking of land lotteries, what exactly are they? Eligible individuals and families in the state would enter their name into the lottery. The number of times their names were entered were based on factors such as age, marital status, whether they were a veteran, successful participation in previous lotteries, or years of Georgia residence. And based on these factors, they would be put in a certain amount of times into the lottery. In another lottery, they would pull random properties in the region that they wish to give out. They would pull a few from each and designate you as a winner or a loser and give you the lottery that they have pulled. And honestly speaking, the odds were pretty good. Very much dissimilar to modern-day lotteries where you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than winning any serious money. In fact, roughly 1 in 10 people who entered their names into these land lotteries would actually win something. And we're not talking a bad chunk of land here. In fact, the median value of the land won was roughly about $800 at the time, which was over half of the median property wealth at the time. And so at the time that the gold rush began up in Georgia, Cherokee land began to be entered into these lotteries so that it could be distributed to prospectors and settlers so that people can go settle up there and find their fortune. Now you might be wondering and thinking to yourselves, wow, this is so unfair. How could anybody allow this to happen? Where is the president? Well, the president at this point is Andrew Jackson, who was elected in 1828 and inaugurated in 1829, who in his literal first address to Congress made it clear his support for the removal of natives from the eastern side of the United States in his first address to Congress. He would then go on to sign the Indian Removal Act in 1830, further solidifying his stance and marking a huge blow for Native Americans. Signed on May 28, 1830, this act made it legal for the president to authorize treaties between natives and the United States government and trade land west of the Mississippi River to natives east of the river against their will more times than not, and justify their removal by saying essentially, hey, we've got another spot for you. Why don't you just come over here? Who cares about where you're from anyway? I mean, yeah, we want it, but shut up. This in itself did not explicitly remove the natives on its own, but it did allow the United States government to set the framework for future removals of natives. While all this is going on, the Cherokee Nation took the state of Georgia to court over its violations of its own sovereign territory. With all the land lotteries and the prospectors coming into Cherokee territory, the nation felt as though that the state of Georgia was violating its right as a free nation, a claim in which Georgia fervently opposed. This case was overseen by Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall, who wrote the majority opinion stating that and ruling that the Cherokee Nation was a domestic dependent nation. Now, what exactly does that mean? Now imagine the Cherokee Nation is almost a child to the United States in this scenario. They're not technically free in the way that Spain would be in relation to the United States, but they're also not a state, meaning that state governments have no authority over Cherokee Nation, but they're also not their own political entity either. Hence the domestic, meaning within the United States, dependent on the United States, nation. This was followed by yet another landmark case for the Cherokee Nation, as a missionary named Samuel Worcester was arrested by the Georgia government for residing in Cherokee territory, which was a violation of state law at the time. He was sentenced to 4 years of hard labor and would appeal this decision. His appeal to the federal court went as follows. With their previously designated notion that the Cherokee Nation was a domestic dependent nation, they were not a part of the state of Georgia. Hence, Georgia law had no authority over the Cherokee Nation. Hence, they had no authority to arrest him. Once again, Chief Justice John Marshall oversaw this case, and he ruled that Georgia had indeed acted unlawfully and had no authority over Cherokee land as they were a sovereign nation. This was a massive deal for the Cherokee, as it further solidified their independence. However, there was one particular person who did not agree with this ruling, and it just so happened to be the most powerful person in the United States, President Andrew Jackson, who would go on to ignore this ruling and continue to go about removing the Cherokee from their homeland. This would snowball into the Trail of Tears. Primarily taking place from 1838 to 1839, the Trail of Tears is the name given to the massive removal of natives from their homelands out west to modern-day Oklahoma, onto reservations there against their will. As in just the winter of 38 to 39, over 4,000 Cherokee would perish on the trail. This brutal end to the Cherokee Nation shows that the Georgia Gold Rush, as the spark that lit this fuse, has two sides to the same coin. On one hand, plenty of people settled up in the Blue Ridge region of the state, creating homes for generations, with some making a lot of money to go with that. On the other side of the story, it gave an excuse for people such as Andrew Jackson or other settlers or people of that nature to expel native Cherokee from their lands in unlawful and brutal ways.